Welcome to the Derailed Railroad Company. Now if you'll read that big sign up there on the wall, the senior stockholders are my children, the junior stockholders are my grandchildren. I got out of the Army in 1945 for fighting the Germans. My whole family was crazy about trains, so we built a railroad here. And this is my whole family right here, the whole Derailed Railroad Company. I built a car for each one of my children out of cereal boxes that they ate cereal out of when they were small children. This was my last child, so I call her the caboose. That's what I call her today. She has 2 grown children. Young lady here has 2 grown children. Young lady has 1. This young man has 3 grown children. This young man right here is also, well, in reality, this young man right here is a man who is taking the pictures right now. He has 2 grown children. This young man has 1. This is my oldest son. He was a highway patrolman in Woodward, Oklahoma. He retired last year. This is my oldest daughter here. She has 4 grown children, and some of those have children. This was my dear wife. She died in 1983. This place has been on television 7 times, 7 different newspapers, 5 Oklahoma State magazines, and also on the internet. And we used to chase trains day and night. We'd hear one whistling in the middle of the night. We'd get out of bed and go see what was whistling. Now, here's a little article right over here that was put in the Arkansas City paper back in 1980. It'd take a person too long to read all of this right here, but if you read this little piece up here, well, it'll give you some idea. It says, my wife thinks we're all crazy. In the middle of the night, if we heard a new train whistle, we'd get out of bed and go see what was whistling. I remember one time she said, well, you're not taking the babies out of the house this time in the morning, are you? I said, well, they're twisting my arms. And a few times she'd get up and go right with us. Over here are 2 locomotives painted like the frescoes that used to come through Blackwell, Oklahoma. And we have rode with these locomotives here several times. The old Frisco 562 and the old Frisco 525. You're walking on the railroad tracks right now. And along these railroad tracks here, you will find some locomotives that's been with the railroads that came through Blackwell, and we rode with all of them. We rode with the Frisco people, we rode with the Santa Fe people, and we rode with the Central Kansas Railroad and the Skoal Railroad. I've always been known as the conductor of all these railroads that come through Blackwell, and right here is the last locomotive engineer that I've been riding with. I've always been known as the conductor of the railroads around here. Now over here is a train set that was put out by the Homeland Grocery Stores back in 1990. And one of my sons was manager of the Homeland Grocery Stores at Watonga, Oklahoma. That year, while all of the kids got the train set, and then they handed me the box. It just came with a little old box with a circle track like most train sets do. They handed me the box, and one of them said, here, Dad, do something with it. Well, it took me almost a year to figure out what I was going to do with it. I didn't want a train that just went around in a circle. But it took me just about a year to figure out how big a table I could build in here and still have people walk in here, and this is what I ended up with. But right up here is the famous builders of this Derailed Railroad Company. Over here are my girls, and over here are my boys. Of course, they're all men and women now. They have children of their own. Over here, I was building cars for my grandkids out of cereal boxes that they ate cereal out of. Cardboard, toothpicks, and matchsticks. The number on the boxcar here tells the date of their birth. These tank cars here are built out of rolls out of paper towels. Now here's an article here that's put in the Ponca City paper about this place back in 1991. And years ago, this was the early days of how the railroads did all of their communicating. They did it with a telegraph key and with a typewriter. Nowadays, they've got everything from computers on down and on up. And each pin on this map over here represents a place where somebody came from to see this railroad. not the number of people, just the place. The Derailed Railroad Company, a blast from the past, known coast to coast and border to border. Over here I've had people all the way from Korea, Guam, Australia, Mexico, London, England, Berlin, Germany, Istanbul, Turkey, and India. And a little better than 2 years ago, I had a call from Hutchinson, Kansas. This lady, she says, there's 29 of us in the group. We want to come to Blackwell on the following Saturday to see the blast from the past, the Derailed Railroad Company. And in that group was 2 men from Russia, and they're going back to Russia the next day. And right here, I want to show you this now. Here was a children's group sponsored by the First United Methodist Church, and they came from the Philippine Islands. Well, they put on a show down at the Methodist Church. Then the pastor of that church brought that whole church children's group in here. And they put on the same show for me as they did there at the church. Well, there was one little girl who had this ribbon in her hair. And she took that ribbon out of her hair and she said, "Mr. Conductor, could I put my ribbon up there?" And did you know, there was no way in the world I could tell that little girl no. So there hangs her ribbon. 1960, why, the Derailed Railroad Company, us good people around here, we wrote to all of the railroad companies in 1960 asking for pictures, and they just sent them in here. Now this picture right over here is from the Alaskan Railroad, from the Department of the Interior, Alaska. That was back in 1960, before Alaska became a state. While we're talking about pictures, you want to be sure to get a picture of this right here now. This applies to all of you railroad fans right here. All you good mamas and wives of these men will take a reading on this. And here's from, let's see what railroad it is. Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis Railroad. Now we got a little railroad right back here. But before you come back here, I want you to read this sign right over here. I don't want you getting run over by a train. Now here's part of our railroad right here, but we're doing a little bit of work on it right now. Of course, on all railroads, you still have to do a lot of maintenance, even on the model railroads. Now we got a little railroad right back here. Now right over here is my favorite railroad. I'll tell you all, when we get here in the back, I'll tell you why Frisco is my favorite railroad. But here's a Frisco locomotive right here. When I used to take a ride with the old Frisco Railroad people that came through Blackwell, they used to talk about this old locomotive right here, 1522. Well, just a few days ago, which happens to be June the 8th of this year, it came into Arkansas City, left on June the 9th. My son Herbert took these pictures right here, all of these pictures. And I'll tell you more about this Frisco Railroad when we get into the back. Now let's go right through here now. Now this whole railroad, when we started out, was built out of junk. Cardboard, toothpicks, matchsticks, chicken wire, paper, plaster, pine cones, and coffee grounds. Now we'll tell you about these trees we got here. These trees are all made out of pine cones. We don't have pine cones like this around Blackwell, Oklahoma. But my wife, her folks and her came from the northern states, like Minnesota and Wisconsin, where they have pine trees like that, pine cones like that. But around Blackwell, all we got is these little old stubby things like these right here. But anyway, one of them, my kid folks from the north used to call down here and tell us, my wife and I, that he was coming down for a visit. I used to tell them on the telephone, "Oh, no, you don't, unless you bring me some pine cones." And that's where all of these trees come from. It's from the northern states, Minnesota and Wisconsin. I want to tell you something about this trestle over here. That trestle over there, coming around this mountain here, is made out of these old wooden matches like these right here. This old wooden match right here. Years ago, when I used to work on radios and television for a living over at Peckham, Oklahoma, there used to be a man that lived by himself, kind of an elderly man. He sat right here in this corner right here, and he had his television set over in that corner over there in his room. And he smoked a pipe all the time. Well, I got called over there when I first met him to work on his television set. As I said before, I used to work on radio and television for a living when I got back out of the Army. Well, anyway, I go over there, and this man, I don't remember his name, but anyway, he sat over here smoking his pipe, throwing them old burnt matches over there beside that television set. Well, I went over there one day to work on his television set, and there's a good little stack of these burnt matches just laying there. And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do with those old burnt matches there? And he called me by name. He said, well, Leroy, he said, I'll tell you, when I get time and feel like it, well, I'm going to clean them up. I said, well, let me have it. He said, well, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to put them on my railroad. He said, on your what? I said, my railroad. I said, we're building a railroad. Then I told him about the trestle. So I took all of his matches, and that's where the trestle come from, built from his matches. Well, after I got the trestle all built, I was going to take and go see him and tell him to come over and see where his matches were. But in the meantime, the poor young man, why, he had caught another train and passed on. He never got to come see where his matches were. But as I said before, this whole railroad was built out of junk. Now, we also built this railroad from places where we'd been. We rode a train through a cut, so we built a cut. We rode a train through a tunnel, so we built a tunnel. We also rode a train around a mountain, so we built us a mountain. And I've got a son and a son-in-law that worked at the refinery over at Ponca City, Oklahoma, and we had to have a refinery. So my son has built a refinery. I mean to tell you, I'm really proud of that refinery. That looks like a refinery. And we also been out to Monument Valley in Arizona and Utah and saw those buttes where old John Wayne used to make pictures, so we built those. This black coal chute is still in use on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in Chama, New Mexico. That's built 3/16 of an inch to the foot. This big long freight train right here has been to Blackwell over the last 45 years. I used to go down to the old Frisco Depot when we had it, copy the dimensions off from them, build them 3/16 of an inch to the foot, paint them the same color, put the same number on these cars that was on the original. This whole train's been to Blackwell. This whole train's made out of cereal boxes that my kids ate cereal out of when they were smaller people. This old Halliburton cement car used to come through Blackwell twice a week on the Frisco Railroad when we had the Frisco Railroad. Now this part, oh wait a minute, I want to tell you about something over here. Now, I want you to look at this river on this railroad here. You see this little river right here? I want you to see the name on it. I want you to see the name on that river. I'm really proud of that river. That little river is named after one of my great-granddaughters. Her name is Kayla. I named her Little Pearl for this reason. She was born on Pearl Harbor Day, December the 7th. And I definitely remember Pearl Harbor Day. But anyway, Little Pearl built that river. And I want you to look over here in this bridge. You can see Little Pearl and her granddad fishing. And Little Pearl and her granddad go fishing quite often. But old great-grandpa, he don't go because he's too slow. And then down here, well before we had this bridge in here, years ago when we was building this railroad, we used to have a hill kind of come up here, and two rails went down underneath here, then back up around. But one day, my wife was back here with two of my smaller children. At that time, I don't recall which ones they was, but anyway, we had been out to various states, and one of my child was saying, the mother, she said, don't you remember we saw a train going across a suspension bridge? And I said, yeah, that's right, we did. And one of them said, I wish I could remember. I don't remember things like I used to, but anyway, one of them said we was going to take and build a railroad from places where we'd seen it. And my wife, she said that was right. Well, anyway, back in those days, a few years ago, these merchants here in town, when they'd have a promotion of some sort. Why, they didn't have these balloons that they've got today with gas in them on strings. They had balloons with air in them on these flexible sticks. Well, we agreed we were going to build this railroad out of junk in the early days when this thing was being built. Well, anyway, these merchants had this promotion and they had these balloons with air in them on these flexible sticks. And the kids was breaking the balloons and throwing the sticks out on the street. And I told my two kids, I think there were just two of them there. Well, anyway, I told them, I said, go out and gather up them sticks. And one of them said, well, what are we going to do with them sticks, Dad? I said, well, we're going to put them on the railroad. And in the meantime, that bridge was going through my head. And that's where this bridge came from. Well, we could have went to the store and bought some flexible sticks, but we agreed we were going to build it out of junk. So that's the reason we built the railroad out of junk, or out of them flexible sticks there from junk. Now let's go back over here. This part over back here is built like North Main Street here in Blackwell used to look like before 1979. Now here's a picture of the old Frisco Depot that we used to have. Built in 1889, they tore it down in 1979. I built a copy of it, 3/16 of an inch to the foot, and this part right through here is built like North Main Street used to be. The old depot here, the old Frisco Depot, it was torn down in 1979. But the place don't look that way today. The depot's gone, the tracks are gone, and the weeds are beginning to grow up. Now that street right there where you see all those cars is the street right out in front of this Derailed Railroad Company. You go down 2.5 blocks and there's set the old depot. And this part down here, this old roundhouse and turntable, I was trying to build it like part of the old roundhouse and turntable that used to be at my old hometown of El Reno, Oklahoma, on the Rock Island Railroad when I was a small boy, 3 and 4 and 5 years old. At times when my dad used to go into that old roundhouse, I used to go in there once in a while. And he'd pick me up and set me up in the cabins of them old big black greasy things. And it just seems like yesterday I can still hear my mother saying to Dad, that boy's going to get hurt in there. That boy's going to get hurt in there. And all Dad would ever say was, well, if he gets skinned up, the skin will heal back up. Well, anyway, that's gone now. And this 1519 locomotive used to sit in a park in Enid, Oklahoma, but they moved it to the Enid Railroad Museum. That young girl you see right there is my youngest daughter, the one I call the caboose. And when we was building this railroad a few days ago, 6 and 7 kids had 6 and 7 trains running here and there, and they had so many derails, so we called it the Derailed Railroad Company. And over here I was building cars for my grandkids out of cereal boxes that they ate cereal out of. Cardboard, toothpicks, and matchsticks. The number on the boxcar tells the date of their birth. Now I'm going to tell you about this Frisco Depot here, the reason I built it. Years ago, when I first got back out of the Army, in 45, fighting the Germans, I got acquainted with all of the old Frisco railroad men that used to come through here. When I say old Frisco men, I mean old Frisco men. There was old men running them then, and I was still just a kid as I look back over the days then. I was only 26 years old when I got acquainted with them. But anyway, I got acquainted with them. They treated me just like I was one of them. They put me over here on this locomotive, old 512. That was my favorite Frisco locomotive. They put me over on the left side to watch the grade crossings as the cars went across the street there by the railroad tracks. They taught me the whistles to blow. Then when we get out on the straightaway, they put me underneath the throttle and they taught me how to run one of them. And I did that for almost 15 years, every Saturday, rain or shine, sleet or snow. We went from, switched around here in Blackwell, then we'd go over there to Ark City and Winfield, go on over to Beaumont, Kansas, and come back the next morning. That was the reason I built that station, because they were good to me. Well, I also knew a conductor that was on the old Texas Chief, that big long passenger train you see there. It used to go through Ponca City, Perry, Guthrie, Oklahoma City, on down to Dallas and Fort Worth. That was when Santa Fe had a passenger train running through Oklahoma. That was one of their good passenger trains, the old Texas Chief. But we have that no more. But anyway, this conductor, I knew him. His name was Ray Hinkle. He was a friend of mine. He was conductor on that. But then later on, he became conductor on freight trains. Well, it was getting about time for him to retire, and also at about the same time, they took the old caboose off of the freight trains. And then he retired. But Mr. Hinkle, a good friend of mine, a real good friend of mine, he was in here several times. But anyway, he knew I was partial to this old Frisco depot. And Mr. Hinkle, he was a poet. He wrote poems, stories about trains, about train stations, about hobos. And about 4 months after they tore down my so-called my own Frisco station, he come in and he handed me this poem right here entitled No Train Today. Today I waited for a train besides a vacant piece of ground where a depot used to stand and travelers could be found. I'll wait a little longer for the train to come by. I look in both directions but see nothing with my eye. A stranger then approached me and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for a train," I said, and he wiped away a tear. He expressed to me his sympathy and then went on his way. I'm still waiting for the train that may not come today. I'm still waiting for the train with smoke belching from the stack. Do I hear the wheels humming as they glide along the track? The depot's been torn down. In passive memories I look back. There'll be no train today. They've taken up the track. Well, about 4 months after they tore down that station, he come in and he handed me that and said, "Here, LeRoy, this is yours." Then in about 6 months, I was pallbearer at his funeral. To run a passenger train, I'm going to take and ask you the same question I ask everybody that comes in here. I'm 81 years old, but I've had some people, two people I remember, they were 92 years old. And I always ask them this, I said, "Have you ever rode a passenger train?" Now, what really got me though was that this person that I asked, 92 years old, said, "No, we've never rode a passenger train." Well, I could never figure out how come in 92 years we couldn't find time to ride one passenger train. Well, at 92, the train has almost left the station. Now, we're going to run a passenger train. Now, we all know what a passenger train is. It's a train that we have to take and pay money to ride from here to there. Well, also, ahead of the old passenger train, we've got a unit they call a locomotive. And in that locomotive is a man we call the engineer. He controls the movement of that train. But before he can move that train, he's got to take his orders from the old conductor. The conductor is in charge of the entire train. He's in charge of the safety of the people getting on and getting off. And the engineer has got to listen for that conductor because he takes his orders from the conductor. He cannot move that train. So we've got to listen now for the old conductor.
Aboard! Aboard!
Now we heard all aboard twice now, but a real conductor that's been at the job a long time, knows all of the rules and regulations and really sticks with them, will say all aboard 4 times. Now we've heard the all aboard twice now. The engineer has got his ears now listening to that conductor. Now we've heard the all aboard twice now.
Aboard!
There's the third all aboard. You better be getting on that train. All right, the engineer has heard that all aboard 4 times now. That's his orders to move that train, whether you got on that train or not. So if you didn't get on board, you have missed the train. You have to wait for the next one. All right, the passenger train's back at the station now. People are going to get off. And all these people that just now had a good ride, they're getting off of that station. They're going to come over here to a little old carnival that we've got going on over here. Now I want to show you something over here. Right up here is where I spent 4 years of my life during World War II, fighting the Germans with my 3 brothers. Brother 1, 2, and 3. This brother right here didn't make it. He got killed doing the same work that I was doing. During World War II, both of us used to work on the radios. And the sound system went in the old B-25 Mitchell bomber and the old B-26 Marauder bombers. Then them old flyboys would head for the railroad yard, cripple it, go to the refinery and tear heck out of it. It'd just be a lot of times I'd get through working on the radios that went in the old B-25, especially the old 25. And by the token though, the old B-25 was the first airplane during World War II that bombed Tokyo, come off from an aircraft carrier. But anyway, them old flyboys always used to say to me, Sergeant, when you get through with your work, well, we'll take you for a ride in one of these. I always used to say to them, oh no you won't, you don't have enough wheels under you. But anyway, I've been up in an airplane before, but I had no business being up there where that bombers were. You know, I can't read it even today, after World War II's long gone. And those old bombing pilots went on a bombing raid, they traveled in a straight line. They couldn't zigzag or nothing. And all them old boys on the ground putting all that flak up at them. I'm talking about the German boys putting all that flak up there, and they had to fly through that flak. I wish now, if I would have known, I could have came back. They would have had room, but in them bombers, you only got room for each man that has a specific job to do. So there wouldn't have been room for me, but I still can't figure out how in the world they ever got back, because they had to fly through that flak. The reason I know so much about flak is because that was part of my job with the big guns that we had, putting the flak up at the bombers. I don't know how today how they ever come back, because I know how much flak we threw at them. Oh yeah, I want to tell you about this banner up here. A lot of people call it, they're not really acquainted with it, and they call it a German flag. It's not a flag, it's a wall banner. But anyway, when we was working, fighting the Germans, going through Munich, Germany, well, me and my men, we go into this one great big old building, and I mean it was a big building. We go into that building where the German soldiers used to go in and sit down at the tables and drink their schnapps. bragging how supermen they were, and doing this and doing all that good stuff. But anyway, these banners was all over the walls. We took them down, this one brought back with me. But anyway, I'm going to show you something over here. During World War II, I always carried a camera with me, and I always took pictures of every place where I'd been. The woman that I married, she sent me film all the time. She kept sending me film, and she knew I was going to take pictures because I told her I was going to take pictures. I always carried a camera every place I went. Well, anyway, when we was whipping and eliminating a few German soldiers, as we went through Munich for the first time, I stayed right in the same building where the old German officer did. Well, I took his uniform away from him, dressed up in that German uniform, and give him that old Nazi salute as they put him in our prisoner of war truck, hauling him to our prisoner of war camp. At that time, I was with the 288th Signal, attached to the 9th Air Force, with the 31st Anti-Aircraft Outfit. And this brother over here now, he was with the 8th Air Force out of England. But I was with the 9th Air Force, which later on come under the jurisdiction of old General Patton. But anyway, I had my picture taken in his uniform, giving that old Nazi salute as they put him in our prisoner of war camp. Well, anyway, and to this day, I don't even know what ever become of the German uniform. I really don't. But anyway, I took pictures of all of the stuff that we'd shot up as we went through towns and everything. Here was part of the crew that I worked with. We was on the move all the time. We'd go from one gun position to another gun position. We took care of all of the big old 90s that was attached to the radar. Back in the days of radar, or of World War II, the early days, radar was a secret weapon. And they didn't allow me or anybody to take pictures of the radar sets and associated with these big 90 millimeters that we had pointed upstairs, putting the flak up at them. That's the reason I was talking about that flak. I couldn't understand how the American soldier flying those planes, how he got through that flak, because the bombers had to fly in a straight line. And I know what took place because we was on the ground putting the flak up at the German soldier airplanes. So I knew all about that flak. But anyway, I took pictures of everything where I'd been, with the men that I worked with and everything. I even run across an old dog. The dog took up with me because I used to give him scraps. Well, anyway, I tried to give him a bath one time and had a heart giving him a bath. And now right here's a picture. We just come back from a gun position. There's a big old gun back over in here, which I can't show you a picture of because they wouldn't allow us to take it. We just come back from working on these big old guns over there. There's 4 big guns over here, big old 490s pointed straight up in the air with a couple of radar sets over there. Well, anyway, then we go on some more. Later on, the dog went crazy. My dog went crazy. And one of the guys come hollering and said, "Sergeant, your dog's crazy." I said, "Well, if he's crazy, go shoot him." They said, "Oh, no, you give us orders to leave that dog alone." So I had to go shoot my dog and then bury him. Well, anyway, there's some more pictures there's a picture there now. We was still blowing up the Germans and tearing up everything as we went. All through there. And there's where they give me a boat to go from the island of Corsica to Sardinia, checking the guns on it. I've got a big 90 millimeter gun over in here, in case we ever needed it. Here's one of the boats that we blowed up. And I'm back on that boat again. Here's another old sergeant that I used to work with right here, old Sergeant Saba. Now that man right there, old Saba, he could talk about 4 different languages. Me, I could very well talk good English as far as that went. But anyway, both of us was good friends, and we did a lot of work together. And now here's where I met up with one brother. That's this brother right over here. I found out where he was at, so I went to see him. Then later on, I found out where this brother was. Here's a picture of him right here. He was with the tank destroyers. He was about 45 to 50 miles ahead of us on up the line. Well, I found out where he was at because we wrote to each other all the time. Well, I go to my captain and I said, I know where my youngest brother is and I want to go see him. He said, well, how do you know where he's at? I said, well, we get mail. He said, yeah, but we censor the mail. I said, yeah, but we got ways of talking to one another. Well, anyway, I found out where he's at and I told my captain where he was at. I said, I'd like to go see him. He said, well, he said, you go see the major, so I'll go see the major. And the major said, Sergeant Jack said, we're not due to move up into that area until the day after tomorrow. And I told him, I said, heck, man, the day after tomorrow may be too dadgum late. I said, I've got to go see him now. I said, you know what all goes on. I said, you know how much shelling we run into. I said, he's 40 miles on up the line. He's getting a hit a little heavier than what we are. Well, anyway, then he said, well, you're going to have to go see that lieutenant colonel. So I go see him and told him the whole story. And he said, well, Sergeant, he said, if you go, if we let you go, he said, you're going to have to go on your own. But he said, when you get there, he said, we'll take it and write you out an order. You'll hold up there when you get there because we're going to be there the day after tomorrow. He said, that's when we're due to be there. He said, if we're due to be there, we're going to be there. And so I said, what vehicle do you want me to drive? He said, you can take either your weapons carrier or your Jeep, whichever one you want to drive. I said, well, I'll take that Jeep. I said, but in the meantime, I said, I'd like to have 2 sharp razor blades. One on one side of my fender, one on the other. The blade stuck up above your windshield. At night, they used to say the German people wasn't behind that, but I'm telling you, they were. But anyway, at night, remember, when you drive at night, you're driving without any lights. Your eyes have to get used to the dark. You have to concentrate on what you're going to do, on where you're doing it, and how you're going to do it, all at the same time. Well, in the meantime, I had them 2 blades. One of them welded on one fender and one on the other. They stuck up above the windshield. And as you drive down at night, the German people now would string wires across the road. And when you're driving down at night, and you hit one of them wires, you're driving maybe around 25, 30 miles an hour in the dark. But you know what the road is because you have studied it. You always studied the road that you're going to travel on. You knew just about what's there. And you usually knew what was on each side of you. Well, anyway, as you're driving down this road, you come up on that wire, you'll hear a zing! That old knife blade that cut that wire. You don't dare stop. Because if you stop, all these German people now, they would come out and they would take everything out off of the automobile, and even if you got shook up a little bit, they wouldn't hurt you. They wouldn't dare do anything to you, but they'd take your guns or anything that you had and leave you there. But anyway, you don't stop. You keep moving. Well, anyway, I met up with this brother, and then I had to hold up there until my whole company moved up. Then we went on chasing more Germans. Now, let's see if there's anything else back here. When children used to come in here, they'd always send you back things like this in appreciation of what you did. This arrow came from the Presbyterian preschool. It said, we like the Derailed Railroad. Thank you. This one up here says Trinity Lutheran Preschool, thanks you. That was back in 1995 and 1996. And also I want to show you something back down here. This place has always been known as a blast from the past because we don't have any new railroad items in here. Everything is from the past. But these children have always taken right back little old notes, thank you notes and all that. There's one right here now, this board right here. It says, the Derailed Railroad Company, a blast from the past. It says, dear Mr. Jacks, thank you for letting us see your company. But this one little guy right down here, all he said was, Mr. Jacks, a blast from the past. I don't know whether he was trying to tell me anything or not. But right here now, we used to have a Santa Fe motor car that used to come through Blackwell on the Santa Fe Railroad. It was called the Doodlebug. But here was the last conductor on the Doodlebug that came from Ponca City, Artwine, Blackwell, Norden, Medford, Waukeeta, and Manchester. He worked for the railroad for 44 years before he retired in 1955. He was born in 1882, he died in 1962. But that was the last conductor on the Doodlebug. About that prisoner of war camp. That really bugged me that time by them. A lot of times when I even think about it now, I couldn't figure out why in the heck they wouldn't let me go through there. But right up here now is a picture of the Tonkawa prisoner of war camp taken in 1942. It was located at Tonkawa, Oklahoma. When we was fighting old Rommel's men, the Africa Corps, the old Desert Fox, well, we'd heard about prisoner of war camps being built in the United States for the German prisoners that we had captured, and we captured quite a few of them. Well, anyway, when the war was over in 1945, I got discharged in October of 45. One of the first things I did when I got back to Blackwell was walk all the way from Blackwell to Tonkawa. I wanted to go through that prisoner of war camp. But anyway, now the people of Tonkawa are trying to fix up some kind of a marker indicating where the old prisoner of war camp of World War II was. Well, anyway, as I was saying, I walked down there when I got back out of the Army. I wanted to go through that place. But anyway, here's what it says. It says, LeRoy Jacks, Blackwell. Jacks was in the military during World War II and was in combat with the Desert Fox and the Africa Corps. When he returned home in 1945, he walked from Blackwell to Tonkawa, hoping to tour the internment camp. However, when he disclosed his combat experience, he was not allowed into the camp because the prisoners were Germans from the North African campaign. Now let me tell you about a picture right over here right quick. Now that old Texas Chief train right over there that I told you about earlier, that same old train, the old Texas Chief. Back in Ardmore, Oklahoma, back in 1953, old Texas Chief derailed a bull. This old bull tried to cross the track, an old train over here. The old Texas Chief hit that bull, knocked that bull over, and the bull hit a switch. And somehow threw that switch and derailed the train. Well, I've had school children in here, and I remember this one bunch. This school boy, he's a pretty good sized boy. And he pointed up here at this picture, and he said, "Oh, it don't look like that bull got hurt." And then I'll point down here, and I'll say, "That's all that's left of the bull." I had a railroad man in here one day, and he said, "Jack," he says, "I think you were shooting the bull."
Okay.
Well, back in 1960, while we wrote to all of the railroad companies in the United States asking for pictures, and they just came into this place. But here's one picture I could never figure out how come we ever got. It's from the Alton Southern Railroad Company. This letter is dated September the 9th, 1960. It says, "Mr. LeRoy R. Jacks Sr., Jacks Radio and Television Service." That's what we called it then. It said, "Dear Mr. Jacks, we have located a photograph of one of our steam engines which were in use prior to our converting to diesel some 15 years ago." So 15 years ahead of 1960s when this company went to diesel. Anyway, it says, "Unless the Frisco has located a steam engine in your city park, I doubt if some of the Cub Scouts have ever seen one. It will probably be more interesting to members of your model railroad club than a picture of a diesel, of which I am sure you will receive several. This picture will probably reach you at the end of next week. Best regards," signed the traffic manager. Well, anyway, we got about 3 letters from this company, and And one letter I remember especially, the letter said, "We have located a picture that was located in one of our depots that was torn down." And this picture right here is one that I can never figure out how come we got it. Whoever tore down that depot, I couldn't understand why he didn't take the picture. I know if I'd have tore down the depot, I'd have took it. But anyway, I'm glad he didn't, because we got it. But it came framed, insured, and everything, free of charge. That was one picture I could never figure out how come we got it. There, about World War II now. Here's a picture down here of one of the guns that I was on during World War II. These guns right down here were at the base of the old 90 millimeters that we had pointed upstairs, putting the flak up at the bombers. The sandbags all the way around that gun. That's down at the base of the old 90s. Well, anyway, when the bombers had come over bombing, why, the bombing rate on, I think the longest one I ever went through lasted about 30 minutes. Then the bombers had to leave because they only got so much gasoline to get there and get back. Well, anyway, after the bombers left, if it was in the daylight, in come the old boys like the ME-109 shooting at everybody on the ground. And this is what we shot back at them with. And I'm telling you, when all of that happens, I'm telling you, it happens fast. You don't have time to think about nothing. You're behind that old gun, boy. All you do, well, you ain't thinking. All you're doing is trying to get the shells out of that gun, trying to melt that barrel of that gun down. Well, anyway, after it's all over with, though, that's when you get the shakes. You can't figure out how in the world you come out of it alive, because people all around you behind them, some of them got killed, some of them got hurt. But I'm telling you, you really get the shakes after it's all over with. But right when it's all going on, everything happens just like that. You don't have time to think about nothing. All you're trying to do, boy, is pull that trigger. That's it. We got one picture here. I'd like everybody to read that comes through this door. It says right here, all aboard, all trains on time. But it also says this, through this portal enter the people who know they are on the right track. Right up here now, railroad crossing. Trains can't stop, you can. The picture right there is a real good friend of mine. He also knew my children. He used to come out to our house at times. That's Mr. Mike Lean. He was a locomotive engineer. He was with Operation Lifesaver. That's a program that the railroads put on, trying to take enlighten people about crossing these grade crossings where the trains and the automobiles can meet. Not too long ago, Mr. Mike Lean passed away. He caught another train. Well, I'll tell you about this. This part right here now, it's called Arleneville. The reason we call it Arleneville is because my youngest daughter, the one I call the caboose, when she was a little girl, she put this stuff in here, and her name was Arlene. But that's the reason we call it Arleneville. But anyway, I had a bunch of Frisco guys come in here one time. There must have been 5 or 6 Frisco railroad men. They come in here, and they went into this bathroom here. Well, in this bathroom here now, there's pictures all over the walls about trains. Over here, about trains over here, and then a little piece about Bastogne. But anyway, these railroad men, whenever they'd come in here, why, I remember this one bunch. Why, this one guy goes into the bathroom. Of course, the door is shut. And we me and the other Frisco guys go on there in the back, start talking about this and talking about that. One of them said, I said, I can't remember now what this railroad man's name was, but anyway, he said, you better go see about old, I'll just call him John right now. He said, you better go see about John. I said, well, he went to bed, and he said, yeah, but he said, that's been about 15 minutes ago. And so then finally he come out and he said, boy, when you go in there, you don't want to come out. There's too much to read in there. Well, anyway, then the whole bunch had to go in there and look at the bathroom. Well, there's one little article that there was a bunch of railroad men came from my oldest son's hometown of Woodward when he was a highway patrolman. He brought some railroad buffs in here. Well, one of the articles that they wrote back and said, when you go to the Derailed Railroad Company, you want to be sure to check out the restroom. Back over here to read it. The one right above your head here between these two lights. To my way of thinking, that's the stupidest way there is to die is get run over by a train. It don't have to happen, and it shouldn't happen, but it does. Every hour and a half, 90 minutes in the United States, a locomotive and a vehicle collide. We're real smart. We're waiting around trying to beat that train. I used to take and go to a lot of train derailments. I used to know all these old Frisco guys, and I knew a lot of the old Santa Fe guys. I remember one, I think he was a Mexican, but he worked for the railroad for a long time. I can't recall his name. He lived right here in Blackwell. But every time, I remember one time I went with him out to a derailment where there was a wreck where a car and a vehicle and a locomotive run together. It was out on the Santa Fe line. Well, anyway, at this grade crossing, driving this automobile was Mom and Dad. They were driving that car. Well, I wouldn't have thought much about it if Mom and Dad is stupid enough trying to beat that train when they see that train coming. But anyway, they told me that 9 times out of 10, it's Mom and Dad driving the automobile and they see the train coming, but they're in too big a hurry to go someplace and they try to beat that train. And they didn't do it. Well, that don't bother me so bad, because if they want to be stupid enough to try to beat that train, let them go. But, what happens to the little guys that's riding in the back seat? They had nothing to do with trying to make that automobile beat that train, and they got the same treatment. Oh, I'll tell you, these grade crossings are... Well, I'll tell you, the first one I saw reminded me of the days of the war, just like a tank running over something. And I remember, well, they just got there, was taking the little guys out. And that's when you really, it shakes you up. Yeah, I don't even think nothing about it. Mom and Dad got run over, because if they want to be stupid, let them go. Them little guys, they had nothing to do with trying to make that car beat that train. Nothing. But they didn't think about them little guys. If Mom and Dad's by themselves and they get hit and they don't have any children, let them go. But if they had children, they still didn't think of their little children, because they're left behind now without Mom and Dad. All because they're in too big a hurry to try to beat that train. That's the reason I liked old Mike Lane, because he was with Operation Lifesaver, trying to educate the people not to try to beat that train, because it's a losing fight. You know, but this is the builders of the Derailed Railroad Company, right here. The famous Derailed Railroad Company builders. Those are my girls and those are my boys. They are the builders of this Derailed Railroad Company. I'm real proud of that bunch right there. Right there is a picture of my oldest son. He was a highway patrolman. He retired last year. Well, right over here on this bench here, while we're working on a couple of locomotives right now. Turn on a little bit of light here. Would turn one of these on, but you can't turn them on until you get them fixed. But you know, these little locomotives, have almost got as many small parts as a big old locomotive has got big parts. They all have parts to make them smoke. They all got parts to take and make them run. They all got parts to take it whistle. Well, they're just like a locomotive on a small scale. When somebody leaves this Derailed Railroad Company, I have them to sign my gas book. I've had people sign this gas book from all over the world. Now, I want to tell you about a bunch of school children I had in here one time. I want you to look at that big sign up there on the wall, the senior stockholders and the junior stockholders. Now, this group of school children that was in here, this one little boy, he couldn't see everything fast enough. He looked to me like his little eyeballs were just sticking out. But right away he comes out and he says to me, he said, "Mr. Conductor, what's going to happen to all of this when you die?" And I said, "You can read, can't you?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, look at that big sign up there on the wall. The senior stockholders are my children, and the junior stockholders are my grandchildren." He points to the junior stockholders with his little finger and he said, "Well, Mr. Conductor, could you put my name on that list?" Thanks for coming. You're always welcome at the Derailed Railroad Company. Hope you enjoyed your trip. Meantime, don't get run over by a train. I'd hate to pick up a newspaper someday and find somebody's name in that paper that got run over by a train, then find his name or her name in my gas book. Remember, stop, look, and listen. You're not getting run over by a train.